The Prime Minister speaking in Cairns overnight. We're joined in the breakfast studio now by the Resources and Energy Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Minister, good morning to you.
Nice to be with you, Michael.
This Ipsos poll, 4% drop in two-party preferred support and primary support for the government. Are you chastened by this?
Look, polls always tend to tighten as we get closer to an election, and the differences between the two parties get crystallised in the public's mind. But if you look at this poll, if you look at the preferred Prime Minister, you still have Malcolm Turnbull streets ahead of Bill Shorten. That's very important because he's the strong leader of our team and will take us to a victory at the next election.
I suppose a lot of voters are saying the Prime Minister has now been in the job for 5 months, but there hasn't been much action. There's a lot of talk, but he's essentially done nothing. Is that a valid view to take?
Absolutely not. I think his announcement on innovation and the changes there for our startup sector have been very significant. Obviously, he's played a key role representing Australia overseas at important meetings like the G20, like the East Asia Summit, APEC. He had that historic meeting with President Obama as well as visiting our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think he's doing a lot of important reforms, certainly in my area of energy resources, Northern Australia. We've been working very closely together.
But where are the decisions? You mentioned international stagecraft there and the innovations. International visits. Where is the action? Where are the decisions?
Well, we're making decisions all the time, particularly about the economy, and we're actually seeing really positive results, Michael. I mean, let's not be down too much on the performance here in Australia. We're in our 25th consecutive year of economic growth. That's the longest run any developed country has had since the Dutch, which had 26 years, but that ended a number of years ago. We have seen record job creation, 300,000 new jobs last year, female workforce participation at the highest levels on record. That's a pretty good story to tell.
I suppose the government has made one decision in taking a GST rise off the table. Other tax measures certainly under consideration. Given Scott Morrison's attack on Labor's negative gearing policy over the weekend, saying it was an assault on mum and dad investors, does that mean there'll be no move on negative gearing by the coalition?
Well, Scott Morrison's left open the door to look at excesses in negative gearing, but he's absolutely right when he says what a joke this Labor policy is. I mean, I thought it was a joke when they said this was the greatest economic reform in a generation. It shows that Labor has no plan to deal with the debt and deficit that they left us when their negative gearing proposal will only produce under $600 million worth of revenue over the next 4 years, which doesn't even pay a monthly interest bill on the debt that Labor left us.
Would any negative gearing proposal put forward by the coalition come up with more than that?
Look, I'm not going to preempt what the Treasurer and the Prime Minister will work through, but Labor's proposal to get rid of negative gearing for established homes and to put investors into new homes could have quite a negative impact on first home buyers and could put upward pressure on new homes. And in those areas where people are expanding outside the normal urban boundaries, young people are looking to get into new homes, and putting investors only into new homes could actually have a perverse impact.
When you talk about potentially looking at the excesses in negative gearing, what do you mean?
Well, that's for Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull to opine on and to elaborate on in due course.
But you must have a view as a senior minister.
Well, my view is that negative gearing does play an important role in the economy because it can put downward pressure on prices, Michael, because at the end of on rents, because at the end of the day, the investor will get a capital gain as opposed to having to charge higher rents. And if you look at the numbers of the people who access negative gearing, around 70% have incomes less than $100,000. So there are 50,000 plus teachers who have a negative geared property. There are 30,000 plus nurses that have a negative geared property. These are the ones who have been targeted by Bill Shorten and Labor.
Now to another story. The Labor Party is referring the Stuart Robert trip to China to the Federal Police, with Mark Dreyfus, the Shadow Attorney General, saying it could involve a serious criminality. Are you worried about that in terms of what the Federal Police may come up with?
Look, those processes take its course. I will not want to opine on that. Allow the investigations to take place, other than to say, Stuart Robert is a colleague of mine. He's in the Parliament and he's paid a very high price.
Let's go to the impending release today of that report by the South Australian Royal Commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. Do you hope, as Resources Minister, given you've spoken along these lines in the past, it'll restart the debate about nuclear energy in Australia?
I certainly welcome the South Australian Government's decision to have this Royal Commission, because it's putting all the facts on the table. Now, Australia's participated in the nuclear fuel cycle for around 60 years, and we have the largest known reserves of uranium anywhere in the world, and 78% of those reserves are in South Australia. So it's appropriate for South Australia to look at it. Plus, South Australia has the stable geology that you would need to store high-level waste. I think this is a welcome debate, but it's also important to point out this is very different to the task I have at hand, which is to find a national site to store low-level and intermediate waste, which is the products of nuclear medicine, which you and I and many other of your viewers are beneficiaries of.
And how's that going?
We've got 6 sites, 3 are in South Australia. We are narrowing that down to 2 or 3 over the coming months. There's been plenty of community consultation. Obviously, we have to dispel some of the myths around the storage of low-level and intermediate waste, but this will be good news and good outcome for Australia if we can find a single site.
Do you see scope of there being a nuclear fuel reactor built in either South Australia or, for that matter, elsewhere in Australia anytime soon?
Look, I think there's a long way to run in this debate. Plus, you have to understand the time lags that would be involved in establishing such an industry in Australia. It would be more than a decade or more. Plus, Australia has access to cheap energy with both an abundance of coal as well as gas, and that has to factor into our thinking about the price of the electricity that would be generated by nuclear power. But there are more than 30 countries in the world who get their power through uranium and nuclear technology, including France, which gets more than 75% of their power that way, and the United States around 20%. And many of the countries in our region, including China and India and some of the other Southeast Asian countries, are all extending their involvement in the nuclear fuel cycle.
OK, Josh Frydenberg, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming into the studio.
Great to be with you, Michael.
Josh Frydenberg, the Resources Minister there. Now, nuclear energy is, of course, in the spotlight this morning with the draft